Welcome to Btekt, David here. I've just picked up an iPhone 11 and you know me, the first thing that I want to do is go and see how the cameras are. And it's good news, but then we knew that anyway, didn't we? It's another beautiful day in London, so I brought along the Note 10 Plus with me. The summer is really dragging on and long may it continue, but I think this is probably one of the last sunny days that we're going to see this year. But never mind, I've got two outstanding camera phones. Like I said, I've only just picked this one up, so this is not really a review. This is strictly a comparison. That said, I'll need to say a big thank you to Vodafone for helping me out with this video. I will leave some links for the brilliant deals for the iPhone 11 that they have at the moment. It is a very pricey device and Vodafone are working hard to make it much more affordable to more people, so I would recommend definitely checking out those links. But of course you can also check out the Direct Mobile's website if you want to compare all of the deals from all of the UK networks. If you don't believe me, just check the link in the video description below or search directmobiles.co.uk. Right, so let me give you a quick rundown of the camera specs. We've got two 12 megapixel sensors for the iPhone 11. One is an ultra wide angle lens and the other one is a wide angle lens. There's no telephoto on this one, and I think they've made the right choice there because as useful as the telephoto lens is, I personally much prefer to shoot with an ultra wide angle camera. Plus, you've got the digital zoom if you need to get in close. I still think that this one is going to be the big seller for Apple despite it being one lens down on the Pro. It is clearly the successor to the iPhone XR, and it does share some of the same characteristics as that phone, such as the slightly larger bezels around the screen and the lighter feel in the hand. Stand by for a full review on this device coming very soon. The Note 10 Plus on the other hand is working with three lenses, two 12 megapixel sensors, one for the wide angle and one for the telephoto. The third lens is the ultra wide angle camera with a 16 megapixel sensor. The Note 10 Plus also has that movable aperture which is only on the wide angle lens, which is the main camera on this phone, and it does have the best quality. You know, comparing flagship cameras nowadays is just getting harder and harder. They are already at such a high level that trying to choose between the two is less about how good it is and more about personal taste. But I will give it a go anyway, and we'll start with the ultra wide angle cameras. They are both very wide and carry full frame equivalent views of 15mm. I'm expecting outstanding performance from each one, so the things I'm looking for here are distortion and colour reproduction. I know they're both going to be very sharp, but ultra wide angle lenses usually have some kind of distortion. For the big expensive ultra wide angle lenses, they usually use optics there to correct for that distortion, but mobile phones will use software. So looking at the first set of pictures, and I'm seeing more contrast and more saturation on the Note 10 Plus, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better image. I think the iPhone 11 has a more natural look and is more representative of, real life. But you know what, there's very little in it. I'm really having to look quite hard to notice any differences here. Sharpness is great across both of them, and distortion is barely there. If anything, I would say there's slightly more distortion on the Note 10 Plus. If you look at that building, it seems to be leaning at more of an angle. The road seems to have an ever so slight curve to it, but there's, very little in it, and they both produce stunning images. On this one, I deliberately shot into the sun because I wanted to see how the iPhone 11 will perform. I know for a fact that the Galaxy Note 10 Plus performs exceptionally well when it shoots into the sun because it can stop down its aperture. But looking at these two photos, there's very little in it. I mean, they almost look like they're the same one. There is a small amount of flare on the iPhone 11 and seemingly none at all with the Note 10 Plus, which is quite impressive shooting directly into the sun because you would always expect some kind of flare in those kind of situations. But then having said that, on this one, if you look at the trees, there is a small amount of flare on the Note 10 Plus. The colour reproduction on both of them is really good. The Note 10 again has a slight touch more saturation and possibly a little bit more contrast as well. But it's very difficult to even notice it. Almost like they were just taken on the same camera, but I assure you they wasn't. Again here, the Note 10 switchable aperture does definitely help it out in this kind of situation. The picture is quite a bit less washed out than it is on the iPhone 11. Don't get me wrong, they're both taking great images, but this is a tricky shot for any camera. And for me, the Note 10 Plus comes out top. Shot, there's a fair amount of flaring on the Note 10 Plus, but honestly that could be because I maybe have smudged the lens, but I tried to keep them as clean as possible. Again, more saturation, more contrast from the Note 10, again probably because of its aperture. iPhone 11 does a great job here though, bringing out more blue in the sky than the Note 10 Plus. But again, both very detailed and very nice images. Here both of the cameras seem to struggle with the extra light reflecting off the pond, as well as shooting into the sun at the same time. I mean, I'm really trying to push these cameras just to see how they would perform, and they both kind of, well, it's not exactly what you would expect from these two cameras. But then again, it's a really tricky shot, but fairly washed out, I would say. I think the Note 10 Plus has managed to outperform the iPhone in this shot. I do prefer the colours and it is slightly less washed out, but this is an example of why I love to shoot with the ultra wide angle lens. It just makes even quite boring shots look dramatic and more exciting than if they were just taken on the wide angle. I'll be honest, this is actually really tough to call. I am finding it quite tricky to separate the two. But let's move on to the front cameras and have a look at the portrait modes. It's quite clear to see how much more the Note 10 Plus has blurred out that background. And for this typical kind of subject that you would get for this type of shot, this type of portrait shot, I think they've both done exceptionally well. I do prefer the colours on the Note 10 Plus, but I think that the separation is just ever so slightly better on the iPhone 11. There really isn't much in it, but the blur seems more graduated on the iPhone 11 than it does on the Note 10. I think I look a bit more sort of cut out on the Note 10 Plus and just a little bit more natural on the iPhone 11. Of course, both these phones have their own bokeh effects that you can add to your portrait shots. The Note 10 Plus goes for some less conventional effects like this swirling pattern, whilst the iPhone goes for more natural looks and tries to mimic different types of lighting effects rather than adding swirls to the background. We all know these effects because they've been in lots of different iPhones, but this time it seems like Apple have got it absolutely spot on. I mean, if you didn't know that this was taken on a phone, you would think that it is a DSLR with a very fast lens on it. And even with the black background stage lighting effect, you would genuinely think that I was standing in front of a black background. But no, I'm outside in the broad daylight. Those stage lighting effects were already really good with the iPhone XS, but now with the iPhone 11, they have mastered it. If we look at these pictures of the spray, then again you can see why it is useful to have a movable aperture. If you look at the iPhone shots, especially with the slow motion, the water seems a little bit purple, and that is because of chromatic aberration. Because the lens is so wide open and there's a high contrast between the dark background of the trees and the bright reflected light that's coming off the spray, this usually results in some kind of purple fringing, and that's exactly what we're seeing on the iPhone 11. The way that you would get rid of this with any camera is to stop the lens down, and that's what the Note 10 has done, and you can see how it does make a difference. Both phones are shooting at 240 frames per second in 1080p. I was expecting a higher slow motion frame rate from the iPhone 11, but it's just 240 at 1080, just like the iPhone XS. No super slow motion like the Note 10 Plus, which is capable of shooting genuine 960 frames per second slow motion footage, and it does look great, even though it's only at 720p. When it comes to video, I have actually been looking forward to comparing these two phones, because during the launch of each of them, both of the phones' manufacturers went to a lot of effort to tell us how good their video capabilities are. And even when looking through the viewfinder whilst I was shooting this, I do get what they were talking about. Both can shoot high dynamic range 4K video at 60 frames per second with beautiful color reproduction and almost flawless stabilization. This is what I meant when I said it is more down to personal preference. I mean, how hard is it to choose between these two images? This time I'm looking for the smoothest stabilization, but also for the smoothest frame rate. A lot of mobile phones that can shoot at 4K and at 60 frames per second tend to skip frames occasionally, especially when they're looking at very busy scenes. I don't see that problem at all with either of them, and to be honest, I don't expect to see that problem either. These are two very expensive and very high tech when it comes to their video, so they should give you perfectly smooth, perfectly consistent frame rates throughout your video shoot. Again, I can see the advantage of the switchable aperture on the Note 10 Plus. I think when it first was released with the S9 series, nobody really saw the point of the switchable aperture. It was taken by some people as a little bit of a gimmick. But I think as the camera technology is advancing more and more and more, I think having a movable aperture is actually a good way of improving the images even further. And when shooting on a bright sunny day like this, if you study those images, then you will see the advantage of having that aperture. Stabilization on both of them looks absolutely great, especially for this high frame rate and high resolution. But I think that the iPhone 11 is just a little bit smoother than the Galaxy Note 10. The iPhone does do it slightly better. But when it comes to the colors, they both look great. I mean, these are actually two of the best phones for video on the market at the moment. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Put them side by side and yeah, you can nitpick and try and say this one's better than that and that one's better than this. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because they both give outstanding videos with great stabilization, great color reproduction, and really there is nothing to complain about. Anyway, that's it from me. I know there is one device missing from this comparison, but don't worry, it is on the way. And it's thanks to that ridiculous Huawei ban that idiot Trump has put up. Huawei are understandably a little bit more cautious this time around with their major flagship release, but it will come, and as soon as it does, expect more comparisons. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. It's at Btekt, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. My name's David. This is Btekt.